function. It would be very simplest form of production function. Usually takes two inputs, which are capital and labor, and then it produces some outputs, which often we just produce widgets or whatever. In the real world, of course, that's like a very simplified textbook production function. In the real world, there are many different types of labors, there's different types of workers with different types of skill that you can hire, and many different types of capital. And so the real world production function, even just for a firm, which is just a single entity that might be producing only one product or at least one type of product, even in that case, the real production function has many more inputs than we kind of represent in these very simplified models that we do. So similarly, if we were thinking about sort of a health production function where we're trying to produce population health, there are many different inputs that could produce or can produce better health and safety. So ideally, what we'd like to know when we're thinking about making investments are which inputs are more cost-effective and which inputs are less cost-effective. And the thing that's I think the thing that's maybe a little bit more appealing about the health production function than the VSL is that it should be of interest even if you don't accept the VSL literature. So suppose you just sort of reject even the premise of the VSL, like you don't think that it's right to assign a price to any lives, be they statistical or otherwise. But even if that's true, you should still care about costs, right? So society has finite resources, like the most we could ever spend is basically the entire GDP of the country. And so there's going to be this upper limit to the amount of health and safety that we could possibly purchase. And given that resources are scarce, ideally we should deploy those resources in a way such that we purchase like the maximum amount of health and safety possible. So basically, if you start shifting resources from higher cost solutions, to lower cost solutions, that's going to increase the total number of lives you can actually save with those resources. So the idea behind the article that's in the syllabus is to kind of do a review and analyze which investments cost more for life safe and which cost less for life safe. So this is what we refer to as a meta-analysis. Like the authors who wrote this article did not go and try to calculate like the return in terms of life save per dollar for all of the things that they list in that article. It's more like they go and try to find studies that have calculated those and then summarize the results from all of those studies. So the goal, or if you were like a policymaker, the goal would hopefully be to sort of redirect investment from high cost solutions to lower cost solutions. And so what the article does is it presents numbers in terms of the cost per life year saved. So lower cost here is going to be better in the sense that you're spending less to save one life year. If you want to think about sort of translating this into VSL numbers, you have to start thinking about the number of life years that would correspond to maybe a typical statistical life saved. So that's one thing we didn't really sort of talk so much about when we were discussing the VSL literature, but you could certainly think that the value of life is going to be very heterogeneous across individuals in the population. We did mention like young males tend to be more willing to engage in risky behaviors and therefore implicitly have a lower VSL. So we did talk somewhat about heterogeneity, but one of the biggest things you would think would be a determinant of somebody's VSL would essentially be their age, right? So if you're looking like at an 85-year-old who probably has maybe 5 or 10 years of life expectancy left, they're going to be presumably willing to invest less to quote unquote like save their own life. Again, we're not literally talking about like investments where it's like if you make an investment you will live and if you don't you'll die. More like if you make an investment you will reduce your chance of dying by 1% or something like that. But presumably people who are 85 on average are going to have very different VSLs than people who are like in their 20s or whatever, because one group has like maybe 10 years of life expectancy left, the other group has like 60 years of life expectancy left. So there's not like a direct translation between VSLs and life years lost, which are the numbers that they're using in this particular study. But if you thought like, well, typical person, like the average person in the population is probably about 40 years old or so, and therefore have maybe about 40 life years remaining, since life expectancy conditional on surviving to 40 is probably like close to 80. So then what you're going to think is that a $5 million VSL would translate into about a $125,000 value per life year saved. So just taking the $5 million and dividing through by 40. So if you want to think about sort of like which of these investments would make sense if you're using a VSL in the range of $5 million, then the cutoff would be that you'd want to do investments that are, say, around $100,000 or less per life year saved, whereas once you get maybe above $200,000 or so, it would be more questionable whether you'd want to make those investments. So the main takeaway from the article, I think, is that there's really like tremendous variation across different interventions in terms of the cost per life year saved. So they list 500 life-saving interventions, and they kind of organize them by category. So there's things like airplane safety, auto safety, fire safety, speed limits, traffic safety, and toxins, and medical screenings, and so forth. And I think one of the notable things is that the within-category variation in cost is often higher than the between-category variation in cost. So, for example, it's not the case that, say, spending on medical care is uniformly better or uniformly worse from an investment perspective than spending on traffic safety. Rather, it's the case that some medical interventions are highly cost-effective and others are not very cost-effective, and some traffic safety interventions are highly cost-effective and others are not cost-effective. Furthermore, you can see that there's basically increasing marginal costs in almost all areas. So, sort of the first interventions in a given category tend to be very cheap per life saved. So you can think of those kind of being like the low-hanging fruit. And then the cost per life saved increases as you exhaust those low-hanging fruit and move on to the next ones. So there were a couple examples I thought were like sort of particularly instructive of this. So I've like pulled them out here. So they talk about cholesterol treatments. That's one of them, and then they talk about radon control as another one. So the cholesterol treatments start out being very cheap in terms of life years saved. So this is basically using statins, which are like anti-cholesterol type drugs. So using those on men who are in an age at which they could potentially have heart disease and have very high cholesterol levels. So it was likely that they in fact would have heart disease. So basically using them for that population, they actually estimate like that there's no cost per life year saved. I think that must come from the idea that you could prevent the heart attack. So if you have a heart attack, and of course we're going to treat it, and that itself involves cost. So I think the implication here is that basically using the drugs on those individuals is going to prevent enough heart attacks that you actually save so much money that the spending on the drugs is completely netted out by those savings. So for this very high risk population, definitely makes sense to treat them. Then the next thing that they look at is like low cholesterol diet for men who are sort of older and have reasonably high cholesterol, so 180 or above, and then low cholesterol diet for men who are like relatively young. So those are somewhat more costly. I don't know actually. So like $12,000 and $19,000. It's not clear to me whether or not those are costs sort of associated with the disutility of eating a low cholesterol diet, because that probably is less tasty than a high cholesterol diet. Or if they're actually saying there's a direct monetary cost. It's not so clear to me why why like a low cholesterol diet should be more expensive than a high cholesterol diet. So they may be taking into account to some degree either utility costs on the individual, or maybe sort of like the idea of spending on like a dietitian who would advise them on what they should be eating and so forth. And then you go up to like sort of treating men who are older and have somewhat lower cholesterol. So I think the reason that the cost of treating those men, or that the cost per life years saved of treating those men is higher than the initial group of men, is that, first of all, you're treating a lower cholesterol group, so they're not at as high a risk of dying from a heart attack. And then second of all, actually, ironically, because they're older, even though they're like higher risk of heart disease, the sort of benefits of avoiding a heart attack in terms of life years saved are going to be not as high there because they have less life expectancy left. Anyway, so you kind of go down the list here, and essentially what's happening as you're going further and further down the list is that you're treating groups who are at lower and lower risk of having a heart attack. And so, the cost of treatment, like the cost of the drug, is the same regardless of whether or not the person is at high risk or low risk. But if they're at low risk, then in general, treatment is going to be less effective in terms of like reducing the number of heart attacks that occur, right? So the cost per life year saved increases higher and higher, and we said that the sort of threshold at which you probably want to stop making the investment was around like $100,000 to $200,000. So here it's maybe coming somewhere in this range. I mean, here you're getting like low cholesterol diet for men who are age 20 and have like cholesterol 180, which is like somewhat elevated but not super duper high. That's not a group that like can generally be too concerned about having a heart attack. So it's perhaps not surprising that once you get into these groups who really aren't at much risk of having a heart attack, that it becomes very expensive per life year saved. Then you can also look at radon control. So this is another totally different type of investment, but again, something that hopefully would end up saving lives. So radon is not, I think it's not such a big problem in California. Certainly I know like people in Georgia, we have friends there who I think bought a house that turned out to have elevated radon levels. So it basically comes from the ground, and it's colorless and odorless, so you can't actually detect that there is radon in your house unless you have a test done, which is always great to know there might be like a silent killer in your house. It is possible to remediate it, so basically you have to like install equipment that circulates air out of the house and make sure that the levels don't exceed certain thresholds. And so it turns out, if you're in a house that has a relatively high level of radon, so above 21.6, I don't even know exactly what the units are there, but whatever's measured in, if it's very high, the return to remediating radon, so installing basically the like ventilation and filtration equipment in those houses, is very high. So they estimated like costing only $6,100 per life year saved. So that would be a very cost-effective investment. Then you can think about remediating radon in houses that have somewhat lower levels. So when you're doing it for houses that are above 8.1 but presumably less than 21.6, the cost per life year saved increases because again, sort of the cost of the equipment is not varying by house, but now you're sort of addressing situations where it's not so risky. They sort of look at basically controlling the potential radon emissions from uranium mill tailings. So to be clear, most of the radon that's going to be found in houses is not from like man-made sources, basically naturally occurring coming up from the ground. So setting a higher standard there on release from mill tailings is somewhat less cost effective, costing about $50,000 per life year saved. Then you get into sort of remediating houses that have pretty low levels of radon. So there's the point at which you're exceeding $100,000 per life year saved, so it starts to become questionable whether or not you want to do this investment. And when you get down to sort of like radon emission control at DOE facilities, so that'd be something like Lawrence Livermore Labs. There you're talking about like $5.1 million per life year saved. So essentially, like the actual risks of radon emissions from Department of Energy facilities are incredibly low, even though it's the type of thing that you probably like if you live near one you might get freaked out about. And the cost of further reducing those emissions is very high, so it turns out to be a very expensive investment per life year saved. So that's definitely a case where you would not want to make that investment because you're talking about $5 million just for a single life year saved, and we're thinking of VSL as like $5 million per entire life. So it's not going to pencil out very well. Okay, so then kind of the takeaway here I think is that as in financial investments, it really makes sense to diversify. So you don't want to focus all of your resources in one of these areas because there are increasing marginal costs. So like if you decide, well, we're just going to invest in medical care and sort of like treating problems after they occur, that is not going to make sense because eventually you'll reach a point, no matter especially if you're putting a lot of money, you're going to reach a point where increasing costs and diminishing marginal returns are going to hit, and at that point you'll be better off shifting investments to other areas. So be it traffic safety or asbestos control or whatever. So you don't want to just kind of like place all of your resources in a single area here. And I think sort of the recent debate over, for example, screenings, in particular mammograms, really sort of exemplifies the issues that are framed by the health production function. So this is something that's become a subject of like substantial debate, I think, sort of within the medical and sort of cancer prevention groups. So the New York Times, there's like a New York Times article a couple years ago which summarized a study showing that mammograms don't necessarily seem to reduce the breast cancer death rate by very much. So mammograms are a screening technology for breast cancer. Historically, the American Cancer Society has recommended that women start getting them at a relatively early age, I think like 40 or so. And so the benefit, of course, of any screening for cancer is that with earlier detection, treatment tends to be more effective because you detect the cancer when it's relatively small, and so you can save lives, and of course, you can save life years, basically. But there are costs also associated with screenings. So there's literally the cost of the screening itself. These are not like super cheap procedures. Furthermore, there's a lot of false positives. So there's going to be a lot of cases where the mammogram would sort of detect something that they think might be a problem, but they can't really tell without going in and doing a biopsy. So actually like removing some tissue and looking at it under the microscope. Furthermore, some of the screening technologies, including mammograms, actually involve radiation themselves, and therefore on the margin are actually going to cause like a small amount of cancer. Now the hope is that of course that the benefits of the screening would outweigh the costs, but there is still some small increase in risk. And then finally, there's sort of psychic costs. So especially when you get the false positives, you have people who sort of might be thinking that they have cancer when they actually don't, and that is it's hard to put a monetary value on that, but it's definitely a very real cost. So the questions that are sort of important here are whether or not mammograms actually reduce breast cancer rate, and if so, at what cost. And so the study that sort of triggered this article and triggered some of the debate as well was a study that leveraged essentially a natural experiment. So it wasn't an RCT. I mean, there have been RCT randomized control trials done on screening procedures and so forth, but it turned out that Norway basically introduced mammography to women in certain age range. So women who were 50 to 69 were given regular mammograms starting in various years, and then women 70 and over were not. So that might seem a little bit strange to typically think of cancer as something that becomes more prevalent with age. That is true, but it's also the case that basically once you get above 70 and stuff, it's like sort of what we call competing risks. So it's not kind of worth it to screen you for something because something else is going to kill you anyway. So all women, it's kind of morbid, but true. So basically all women qualified for new breast cancer treatment, and only some of them qualified for regular mammography. And basically the result was that the new treatment did seem to reduce mortality, but there was very little evidence that the regular mammography reduced breast cancer mortality. So it does, be clear, they do detect more cancers when they screen for them, as you would expect. The problem is that a lot of these cancers are sort of so small that it's not clear they would have ever developed into anything that would even need to be operated on, let alone threaten your life eventually. And so the sort of, there's a lot of costs, and it's not clear exactly what the benefits are. So, I mean, this is not something that's resolved yet. I think there's sort of basically disagreement right now between like the American Cancer Society and sort of other cancer-related groups that are generally pro-screening versus some of the medical community really are sort of skeptical that it makes sense to always screen people if they don't have any risk factors in like sort of family or other risk factors for breast cancer. Okay, so that's it for today. And like I said, I will post a short problem set today. My office hours are on Thursdays and Mondays, so if you have any questions about that problem set, you should show up to office hours either tomorrow or on Monday.